Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Folks, welcome back to the I Thought You Would Like to Know show. This is your host, Pat Flynn. I am joined once again by the mighty and magnificent Big Pete's. Pete, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
So we've been having some, it goes back and forth. You're on my show, I'm on your show, but we always have so many fun, productive conversations. It's hard to stop. On your show, we've been doing an interesting series, and I want to make sure we mention that so that way all the listeners here can go investigate. We have been doing what we call the minimum effective apologetic for Catholicism. And the project that we've undertaken, and I think have done a fair job outlining and defending, is that of answering what we believe are the critically essential but fewest fundamental questions a person needs to answer in the affirmative to become a Catholic. And we start all the way on the opposite side of the scale. You know, imagine somebody's an atheist, God help them, and we need to bring them into the church. You know, so what are the questions that we need to talk about? One, we said, is general existence of God questions. What reasons, what arguments do we have for God's existence? Two, was Jesus God? Is Jesus God would be a more appropriate way of saying it. What evidence do we have for that? And then three, did Jesus found a church? And if so, what church was it? And we, of course, argue that yes, he did. It was the Catholic Church. So I've been having a ton of fun with that series. Pete, correct me if I'm wrong, but everybody, like all those episodes are up for replay on your show, correct?
They are right now, yeah. And even I would argue if you're a Cradle Catholic, I mean, me and Pat always talk back and forth. Pat is currently visiting in Wisconsin, and I think we killed a couple of fermented hoppy beverages talking about this topic. And how it even pertains to Cradle Catholics. You know, we talk about, you know, people talk a lot about their beliefs nowadays, but don't really know that structure. Don't really know, like, the basis of things. And that's really what we're trying to get back to. You know, what are good arguments for God? What are good arguments for the divinity of Christ? And we just did one that's going to go up real soon about what's called the fitness argument. Where does Christ fit into the Bible? We talk about the Old Testament prophets and Jesus being the answer to simply, as the Gospel of John put it, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Taking that Old Testament word and really moving it forward, and Christ as the roadmap. So this is an ongoing series now, in its fifth part. Me and Pat have spent 5 whole hours digesting this. I mean, we call it a minimum, but we've gone on for 5 hours.
Yeah, well, it's a minimum effective apologetic in the sense that there's only 3 questions we need to answer. So it's simple, not necessarily easy.
Right.
So, you know, there's some things we have to grapple with. I mean, when it comes to natural theology, I mean, you take any one argument for the existence of God, we could do a whole semester on just that alone. So simple doesn't mean easy, as we know, but it's a great series. I've been having a ton of fun with it. I hope people will go over to your podcast and check it out. So you mentioned the Cradle Catholic thing. I think that will be a good jumping off point for this episode. It's something I want to talk with you, Pete, about. But before that, where is the best place for people to have a listen to those episodes? Do you have a central hub for your podcast?
Yeah, I use Libsyn for my downloading. It's kind of a landing page for everybody that's not in the app world. I love you, Mom, but you're a little behind the times. That is the right side of things.libsyn, LIBSYN.com. You can find all the episodes there. I'm also on Google Play, the Right Side of Things podcast, and iTunes and Spotify as well. You can also find me on Facebook at the Right Side of Things Pod is my name there. Exclusive content there. Post a lot of things for my audience to kind of get engaged in, and things in the world that I will be commenting on in the future, kind of to give sneak peeks. I'm also on Instagram, the Right Side of Things pod there as well. So you can find me wherever your social media treks take you.
You're prevalent, Pete. You are absolutely prevalent. So I've been having a ton of fun, and I look forward to continuing that series. It's important. And it brings me back to what I think will be a good jumping off point for this episode, which is the Cradle Catholic thing. So I'm a revert in the sense that I would not consider myself a Cradle Catholic simply because I never had that proper catechesis or religious upbringing or anything like that. So I was technically, I was baptized Catholic, but that was about as far as it went. So when I first came back into the church, I was so excited to go out and engage the culture and bring all these people into the church. But as I got further along, as I started to dialogue with more people in the church, particularly Cradle Catholics, I realized there was a big problem there. So many of them were unsure of their beliefs. They didn't have the foundation. They didn't have the proper catechesis. Many of them actually held wrong beliefs about the church as well, which was deeply alarming to me, or would deny church teaching. And, this was unsettling for a number of reasons. As one is, this is a very large portion of Catholics. Obviously there is much to be concerned about with the number of people leaving the church. There's a myriad of factors for why that's happening, but certainly a large contributing factor is malformation, terrible catechesis over the years. So I have since wanted to shift my focus as much, kind of split duties, if it were, Pete, of, speaking outside the church and also speaking within and to the church. I realize there's so many opportunities to deepen and strengthen and correct a lot of the beliefs of the Cradle Catholics. I mean, just to give it an example, my wife was recently at a Catholic Bible study where they were just, wishy-washy about a number of things, purgatory included. And it's like, part of it, I think, is a sort of Protestant influence. Another part of it is this weird modernism seeping in, whatever the diagnosis is, I'm not entirely sure, but there's a problem going on. There's no reason that a Catholic should be wishy-washy about something like purgatory. So, Pete, you are a Cradle Catholic. Mm-hmm. Is this consistent with what you see? Is this a problem that you think needs addressing?
Yeah, I think definitely it needs addressing, and I fell victim to this as well, is this kind of anesthetizing, so to speak, with the kind of modern culture. And to be associated with the Catholic Church nowadays is almost anathema for people, if I dare to go that far. It's becoming a stigma, a social stigma, so to speak. Yeah,
it's one of the last remaining acceptable bigotries, isn't it, against the Catholic Church?
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, to be a Catholic nowadays and to say that you're out and to be outwardly Catholic in kind of call it a debate structure or somewhere where you would state your beliefs, automatically nowadays labels you as a bigot, a homophobe, and dare I say someone who's the anti-abortion, and everything that the modern world says you shouldn't be is what you are called to be as a Catholic. And that's people away. And I think a lot of it too is what we've talked about before, is backing your politics into your religion, and how that's a major fallacy.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of the problem, is so many people are under a much greater cultural rather than Catholic influence. Yeah, they're cultural Catholics, but that isn't quite it, because one would hope to say that when you're a cultural Catholic, you would have the culture of proper Catholic belief. Really, they're just Catholic because they were born into a probably already nominal Catholic family, and that's about as far as it goes. So they go out into the world, they don't have proper formation in the faith, they don't get a good, solid, rigorous catechesis, And so they adopt other beliefs, often inconsistent beliefs, very inconsistent with the faith, very often beliefs inconsistent with other beliefs that they hold. I think people are notoriously infamous for maintaining anywhere between like 10 to 12 jumbled up, often conflicting philosophies in their head at any one time to begin with. And certainly you see this with many Catholic, reverts and converts, I think, are kind of different. Maybe not entirely, but at least the ones that I talk to, and I do talk to a lot because this was obviously a big thing for me, was before I converted, seeing, well, what causes somebody to convert, and studying them. They tend to really understand and know and accept the faith, as you're obligated to as a Catholic, all the way through. And then you dialogue with and I'm certainly by no means disparaging Cradle Catholics. If anything, I'm saying you don't know how good you have it. You don't know this wonderful gift that you just happen by God's grace to just have, showered upon you. And that to me is absolutely alarming and dismal, that they don't know how great this gift is. So part of what I want to do is wake them up to it, see this gift,
right.
show them that embracing this is not only right and true, but also beautiful, that you should want to embrace this all the way through, beginning to end. Yes, many people will have to change certain political opinions. I had to do that on various instances as I was going through my reconversion process. All of it worked out for the best in every single instance, not a single exception to the contrary. So there's a challenge there, but there's an opportunity there. I haven't quite figured out the best way to go about it. I've been trying to infiltrate various institutions to make my mark. We have the shows, we have the podcast. I teach Sunday school now, so I'm in the trenches. I'm getting my hands dirty, but I guess the point here is that we need to, people in the church, it's not just about bringing people into the church. Catholics need to do a way better job of that too. Don't get me wrong. But we need to strengthen the faith of the people who are already in the pews.
Right. And to go along with that anesthetizing that I talked about is, me going back to my example and to kind of drag my own self through the mud is, when I was growing up, my mother, Cradle Catholic, has relics in the house and sacramentals and things like that. And, it kind of comes to a paralysis of, you see that as normal, kind of not as not having a real one-word definition to describe it, is you kind of become numb to it, and you kind of start looking at it as, as repetition, as well as, this is just kind of my everyday life. And you begin to kind of take that kind of stuff for granted. Mm-hmm. We were talking yesterday about, my mother would give a daily devotion with us in the car when she was dropping us off at school. And, she'd turn the radio off and she'd say, now let's give our whole day. And, here's the kids, groaning and rolling their eyes. They do make the sign of the cross and kind of mumble the prayer along with mom. Yeah. It's kind of seen as that, at least in my brain, to play my own devil's advocate, is it's kind of seen as that like old person faith, like, oh, our world has evolved beyond a need or necessity for me to be religious. And, my mom, that thing is, that's my mom and dad's faith. And, I don't know if I really go along with that because they've been trying to beat my head over it. It's kind of that rebellious teenager kind of vibe. Like, I don't want to do what my parents were doing. That's so yesterday or last generation, so to speak.
Yeah, I get it, man. It is what it is. Perhaps a portion of it is inevitable, especially in today's culture. Probably even because of today's culture, where instead of honoring your mother and father, the sort of secular commandment seems to be to rebel against them. And there's certainly tremendous value in going through an authentication process, a self-authentication process of assenting, and that's why we have confirmation, right? The problem is when people just go through it as a series of motions, as a ritual without understanding the meaning of why it is there. And what, praying that we get some more rigorous catechesis here. And I know that many parishes are really trying. And I'm certainly trying to do my part by getting in and teaching Sunday school. And Pete, I have to tell you, man, so I teach fourth grade. We're on the commandments. We're on the Beatitudes. These kids are smart. It's like, dude, it makes no sense to me at all that people, especially once you start getting into like late middle school and high school, you can start learning advanced algebra, but somehow you're still on like kindergarten level with religion. Why the heck is that happening? Why is it that you can go into trigonometry, maybe even calculus, and God is still a man in the sky with a beard? Like, why is that happening? That is unacceptable. That makes no sense. Religion should be one of the most challenging and engaging things to study. Pick up Aquinas, pick up Augustine, read the church fathers, and there's so many great contemporaries too. And so when I'm teaching these Sunday school kids, man, like, they are smart. They're all, only in fourth grade, but we go through the commandments. We go deep and wide. We get into, when we get to thou shalt not murder, we talk about the hard cases. We talk about abortion, euthanasia. We talk about where humans get their value, not from what they do, but who they and what they are. I bring them through various ethical theories, utilitarianism and all these trash humanistic ethics. We go through those. I want them to have that seeding and that foundation, so when they hear this nonsense later in their life, they'll hopefully remember, oh yeah, I remember Pat taught us about that. And that's why it's trash, and I don't have to pay attention to people spouting nonsense rather than being taken in by the nonsense. So if fourth graders can engage with this stuff, can grapple with good, deep moral theology, why can't everybody else? And why isn't everybody else?
Well, I think it's part of it too is the infiltration of liberation theology into the church that's causing a whole lot of confusion in what once was clear doctrine as well.
Well, that's certainly part of it. There's been no shortage of active heretics running amok, trying to dilute church teaching and have their way with things, as there has always been in the church. So there's a great mess to clean up there. I think we all have a personal responsibility. Change, as we know, rarely ever comes from the middle, right? It always comes either from the bottom up or the top down. So lay Catholics out there, cradle Catholics, converts, reverts, lay faithful, we have to be the ones demanding and implementing change. It's like everyone waits for these bishops' meetings and they think that they're going to change. They're not going to change everything. The middle always maintains the status quo. Change either comes from the very top or the bottom. And like, that's another point that we have to drive and we have to push. I'm optimistic. I think there's a strong resurgence, especially among younger people coming into the church. Younger people that come into the church they want that orthodox, clear Catholic teaching. They don't want the wishy-washy. They don't want the liberalism, the diluted nonsense. They've had enough of that. That's why they're coming to the church, is because they're so sick of that. So you got to get away from that.
Right. And it's interesting you brought up confirmation too. And, I went through that, unfortunately, when I was 17. I guess the Cradle Catholics go through, your junior year in high school is kind of when you usually take that on. And I walked into class. I went to a private Catholic high school as well. So I had some baseline teachings in Catholic morality and, understood unabashedly that God exists and, had started to go to that next level of Catholic teaching. And I can't speak very well for the CCD programs. or the Catholic youth development programs for the public school kids that were in these confirmation classes as well. But, class 1, week 1, 2, and 3 were giving us the arguments for why God exists. And I kind of looked around all confused. I'm like, aren't you people Catholics already? In like 9 weeks from now, you're going to go before the bishop and say, this is my faith. I'm going to receive the gifts of the Holy Spirit and be anointed as Christ was with Sancta Chrism oil and reaffirm my baptism. And we're forced to discuss why we think God exists. And we even probably had 1 or 2 atheists in the class that said, I don't believe that. Well, why are you here?
Yeah.
I think a big problem with the youth and the church is, we go through the motions to make our parents happy. And I think that's really diluting the church as well. But I mean, there's so much here that could be kind of seen as a failure of catechesis too, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and look, I think it's important. No Catholic's faith depends on arguments for the existence of God. I want to be clear about that. Knowledge of God is a proper and basic belief that can and is justified apart from any philosophical arguments or arguments from natural theology. Now, that said, as a convicted Catholic, I think it's worth taking the time to study these because you'll often dialogue with skeptics, with people who are hostile to the faith. So you want to have a certain tool set, a certain repertoire that you'll be able to effectively evangelize, depending on what the holdup of a person is. Maybe it's emotional, A lot of times it is. People will think, they'll pretend like they're an atheist for intellectual reasons. Like, atheism isn't an intellectual position at all. It's really, I'll be polite.
Well, we've talked about that time and again.
Yeah, but there's usually some sort of deep emotional issue going on. So you have to learn when to play philosopher, when to play pastor, or this or that. So right. It's definitely not bad to teach people the arguments of the existence of God in that context, as long as you're clear of hey, we know what we believe, but maybe here's a way to try and explain it or defend it to other people. And I think, if nothing else, look, I did this with the fourth graders. One of the kids in the fourth grade class is, I know and I feel that God exists, but how do I really know it? So we went through just a sort of very, very basic sketch of the contingency argument. And they got it, man. They probably weren't out ready to go on a debate stage or anything, but they understood it. They were, and it was helpful to them. So these are things that can and should be taught at a very young age to help make those foundations secure. And you have to, make sure that people know that again, faith is a part of proper cognitive functioning, the sensus divinitatis. We are supposed to have it. It is a basic belief. It's warranted. It's a good thing. If we don't have it, then there's something defective. There is something defective with the genuine atheist. There is something wrong. Now, I still would argue that I'm dubious that any such person really exists. On the deepest level, we all know that God exists, just as we all know that there's something truly wrong with gratuitous amounts of harm to other people. We can try and deny it. We can try and not feel guilty about it. But then we sort of feel guilty about not feeling guilty. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really ever fully shake it. That's why it's somewhat insincere. But there's certainly something wrong with the person who takes an atheistic position, in the sense that there's something wrong when somebody has really bad eyesight. There's a defective faculty. You should be having that experience of God, or at least a basic knowledge of Him. This should be taught to kids. So we've gotten way sidetracked here, but I guess the original point was that as people who are trying to spread Catholic culture and influence, I mean, to me now I see so much opportunity within the church, because the church has an evangelization problem in general. The vast majority of Catholics do not feel that evangelization is nearly as important as they should, and not nearly as important as, say, evangelicals think that it is. That's a huge problem. Now, part of that, I think, is because a number of them don't know why they believe the things they do, so they're not comfortable sharing it. They don't have an apologetic toolkit. And two, the church is very sadly riddled with scandal, and they don't know how to approach it, because, like you said, the last sort of remaining big acceptable bigotry in America is Catholicism. So there's sort of a double
double entendre.
A double-sided like a 2 walls thick of challenges there with engaging with the culture. One is you got to know why you believe the stuff you do. That means you got to stop being lazy. You got to take the time to understand it. Number 2 is you got to get over that enormous cultural bias against Catholicism. These are not easy things to do, but at the same time, it's a commandment, friends. Jesus commanded us to go out and evangelize. It's not just like something that, you can't be any more wishy-washy about that than you can about the existence of hell. You have to accept it. You have to not everybody has to do it the same way, but it is a commandment. We are obligated to go out and evangelize.
Right. And that's a huge step that I think a lot of the youth are missing. I mean, John Paul II came out and said that, if you embraced your faith and evangelization, we could light the world on fire for Christ. And that, I think, we talked over our brewskis as well about the ways of the world, so to speak, with one of our dear friends who is kind of fallen away from the faith, but is thinking about coming back into it with his wife. And he posed the question is, where is the line? And we both kind of looked at each other and smiled. And you said, the line is the church. When everything falls apart, the church will stand as the line. We talked too about the LGBTQ question in the church, and Pope Francis, much to his benefit, taking a very hardline approach and saying, no, we're not doing that, because that goes way against our tradition and way against our faith. And I think that the Catholics need to stand up really for what they believe and not take this watered down, if I go to church on Sundays and say my prayers and say grace before I eat meals and maybe even, pray a rosary once in a while, I'm going to be all right. But I mean, as we continue to see the world degrade, that's almost not good enough anymore.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing about that conversation, Pete, was just how productive it was. We saw,
it was incredibly productive.
We saw a genuine interest in transformation occur among somebody who really wanted to come to the church, but seemed to have a number of holdups that had not been previously addressed. And once we addressed them, it seems to me like we removed all the barriers to entry. I will be seeing him again soon, and probably you too, actually, so we'll be able to follow up. But he's going back to church. There's no doubt about it. Like it's happening. That's a huge win. And there's so many people like that. There's so many people who, specifically Cradle Catholics, they want to assent to the church. They want to, accept all the church teachings, but for whatever reason, they feel they can't, because they've been presented with certain cultural objections that have never been cleared for them. They don't understand where these teachings come from. They really do. So if you can just take the time to clear up some of those objections, to give them that proper catechesis, they will not only come back, they will root in and become so much more enthusiastic and energized that then we will be able to create that evangelical zeal that the church so needs. I mean, I forget where the survey came from, but I remember reading a survey of the number of Catholics who thought it was important to evangelize, and the number was it was under 10%. It was abysmally low. Now, could you imagine if that number was up where even evangelicals are, which I think was around 75%? We would have a Catholic transformation overnight.
Absolutely.
Overnight, man. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, but there's so much, potential here for reinvigorating, renewing, purifying the church. I'm Pete. God bless you, man. I know you're out there doing the best, and especially among young people. I mean, the world is going crazy, and like we told our friend, what is that line? It's the God line. The church is going to be that saving grace of a culture that just is destroying itself, and it has been destroying itself, and it's getting all the more batty and insane by the day. So, people are terrified by this. I would argue, in one sense, rightfully so. But as those grounds start to become so unstable, so shifty, people will start looking again to where the sanity is. Where is that stability? And that's where the church has an opportunity to really make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. And we're coming into such a great season to come back into the church too. We're on the steps of Advent. If some of our listeners aren't familiar with the season of Advent, that's the season where we celebrate the lead up to Christmas and all the great readings from Isaiah and Jeremiah. The arise, shine, a light is coming to save you from the darkness. What a great metaphor for Christ's light coming in the darkness of the way we see the world now, thanks to daylight savings time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, God so loved the world that he gave his only son so that we may attain eternal life. The mysteries that are contained in arguably the second most powerful church season, the first being Lent for me especially, mm-hmm. Are two of the most powerful seasons because it really wraps up, what the faith is all about.
Yes, it does, Pete. And I think maybe that will be a good topic for next week's episode, since we're about at, I think we've covered a lot of ground today for our listeners in the Cradle Catholics, but I think we should dedicate a proper amount of time to discuss the Advent season. So much opportunity there to dive into. But before we wrap up today, I want to remind our listeners to just go check out all the other great shows on WCAT. We've got such a wide and interesting selection that, look, you want to get good, proper catechesis, Catholic education. You want to learn some things. WCAT's a place to do it. Also, be sure to check out Pete's show, the Right Side of Things podcast, on Libsyn, Google Play. Check him out on Instagram. And yeah, be sure to check me out too at the Pat Flynn Show, my other podcast. Every Sunday we do Sunday school. We go deep in theology, philosophy, Catholic teaching, also squeeze in some cool interviews. So the Pat Flynn Show, check that out. Pete, my friend, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me yet again.
Thank you for having me. Go with God, my friend.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.